So it's officially trade season in the NBA, as of course it was just about a week ago where the Heat traded Thomas Bryant to the Pacers. You also had the Brooklyn Nets send Dennis Schroeder to the Warriors. Now, that move wasn't particularly surprising because you do expect the Brooklyn Nets to be heavy sellers before this deadline. They got a lot of pieces like Dorian Finney-Smith and even Cam Johnson, both guys that might be options for the Heat, but maybe we can talk about that in another video. But of course, that team is going to be very active at the deadline because they are sellers. Another team that I expect to be huge sellers this trade season is, of course, the Chicago Bulls. They should have really been sellers for years now. For some reason, they thought their mediocrity would turn into success, and it never did. They've been hovering around the 9th to 10th seed range in the East for quite some time now. And of course, because they decided not to resign DeMar DeRozan in the offseason, they did a sign and trade to send him to Sacramento. They also sent Alex Caruso to the Thunder and got 0 picks in return, which is crazy. I'm not sure how smart the Bulls front office actually is, because how do you trade Caruso to a team that has 1,000 first-round picks and you get none of them? You get Josh Giddey, who you're not even sure if you want to re-sign or not, but that's besides the point. Of course, the Bulls still have several pieces with some value that I think they should trade, and that includes guys like Nikola Vucevic, who of course I made a video about just a couple weeks ago. I had a Vucevic to Miami 3-team trade package, so make sure y'all go check that out. They also got Zach LaVine, who does make a lot more money, but he's having a pretty good bounce back season. And then the last guy that they should trade is who we're going to talk about today, which is Lonzo Ball. Now, a lot of Heat fans are interested in Lonzo because he seems like he'd be a pretty good fit on this team. And I want to start off by saying I've been working on this video for a few days because y'all might know with these trade videos, we'll look at the contract, we'll look at the stats, and then I'll go in the trade machine and cook up my own mock trade. But for Lonzo, I found it very difficult because, of course, if we were to acquire the point guard, we'd have to send out a point guard, and that would likely be Terry Rozier. And at this point, Terry Rozier is playing so poor and his contract is so big that he's a very difficult contract to trade. So it was difficult to cook up a trade package, but we'll kind of get into those at the end of this video. Because to start, I want to talk about Lonzo Ball's contract, which for his contract alone is a good enough reason for me to want to trade for him, because this season he's making $21 million, which, yes, it is a lot, but it's an expiring $21 million, which is already better than Terry Rozier because they do make similar amounts of money. Terry Rozier is a little bit more per year, but Terry has this year and next year left on his contract, where, of course, Lonzo Ball would be a free agent after this season. That, of course, is best case scenario. Any contracts the Heat are trading for should be, free, expiring contracts, pending free agents, unless, of course, they're really great players that you'd want to keep. But in this case with Lonzo Ball, it's best case scenario because if you sign Lonzo or if you trade for Lonzo and he plays well, now you can re-sign him at a number that you find fair. If you trade for him and he continues getting hurt and the production's not really there, then you let him walk in free agency and you just cleared up $20 million in cap space, which for the Heat is huge because, of course, they are inching very, very close to that second apron. So regardless of all the basketball stuff and on-court fit, for this reason alone, I would trade for Lonzo Ball, especially if we're talking about offloading Terry Rozier, which is really the only way I could see this trade working, just because the Heat's big money guys, which Lonzo Ball is a big money guy, so we would have to send out equal value. It's really tied up into, of course, Jimmy, Hero, and Bam. And then outside of those three guys, which you wouldn't trade for Lonzo, is Duncan Robinson and Terry Rozier. And I just think Duncan Robinson's a little bit too important to this team right now. He's pretty much locked in at that starting shooting guard spot. And although his shooting nights have sort of been hit or miss, I really love his pairing with Bam Adebayo, and I don't think the Heat would want to break that up, at least not for Lonzo Ball. But let's kind of get into the numbers a little bit here, because Lonzo Ball is a very, very interesting player on the court. He's obviously has dealt with a lot more injury issues than some guys, and that's unfortunate because, of course, you don't wish injuries on anybody. And Lonzo Ball just seems like a really good and genuine dude as well. And especially when you consider before his injuries a couple years ago, he was really coming into his own as an NBA player. Obviously, when he first started in this league, he had his shooting woes, but he worked on the jump shot and he became a very reliable shooter. I want to go to his 21-22 season here, which is where he really got hurt. He only played 35 games, although he never played over 63 games if you look at this here. But in that last season before his major knee injury, I think it was, he was averaging 13 points per game, shooting 42% from three on 7 attempts, which is just phenomenal. He was 42% from the field, which isn't great, but I mean, he was taking 10 shots a game. 7 of those were from three. And when you have a 3-point percentage that's as high as his was, those are very, very efficient numbers. And then, of course, on top of the 13 points per night, he was getting you the 5 assists, 5 rebounds. He was always a triple-double threat on the court. So certainly a guy who's looked at that can do everything. And then that doesn't even count the defensive end, in which he was, again, before he got hurt, he was one of the better perimeter guards in the league. He was excellent at that point of the tag, moves his feet very well laterally. He was just a great on-ball defender. You can see that by the steal numbers here, 1.8 per game in that 21-22 season, which is very, very good. And obviously, all these characteristics that I'm saying of Lonzo Ball is exactly something that he can use. What point of attack defenders do the Heat have right now? Obviously, you got Drew Smith, you got Haywood Highsmith, and Jimmy and Bam will always be good at that as well. But outside of that, your guards aren't really known for defense. I know Tyler Hero's improved, I know Duncan Robinson's improved, but I really do think that he could use some more help in that area, especially when you consider the guys that they've lost over the last couple years. Of course, Gabe Vincent was pretty elite at that. We saw him locking down guys like Trae Young or doing a good job on Jalen Brunson in the playoffs. You lost Caleb Martin, who was your primary defender on a lot of the team's best players. And people forget Victor Oladipo too. The Heat relied really heavily on him defensively. And of course, he's gone now as well. So I think adding a guy who could play defense like Lonzo Ball would be great. The Heat don't have a true point guard, an actual facilitator. Right now, they're kind of running point guard by committee with Tyler and Jimmy and Bam, and Duncan Robinson's getting in there a little bit. But I think a real facilitator can not only open this offense up a ton, but it could also open it up for Bam Adebayo. Right now, Bam Adebayo is really struggling offensively, but if they had a point guard that could get him easy looks consistently, what do you think that would do for Bam Adebayo's game? A guy that could really set up the pick and lob for him. Now, I don't want to discredit Tyler Hero because their connection, Tyler and Bam, has been great. They have been great in the pick and roll, but Tyler is not a pass-first type of guy. He's a bucket getter with an ability to be a decent facilitator as well. So if you had a guy like Lonzo Ball, whether he was starting next to Duncan or starting next to Tyler, and you put Duncan off the bench, which I know I said earlier, I want Duncan playing next to Bam, so that complicates things. But either way, I think if the Heat traded for Lonzo, he would come off the bench and maybe sort of run that bench unit. But he would still be integrated with the starters, and that includes Bam. I think that would help his game a lot. And even off the bench, having a guy that could run the bench unit would be great. Because right now, Terry Rozier is not doing that. Terry Rozier was a guy that was getting 7 assists a game in Charlotte, was a pick and lob guy. We saw a little bit of that last year, and for some reason, Terry Rozier doesn't do that now. All Terry Rozier is good for is passing up open threes and shooting a sidestep, heavily contested fade away from 3. Why does he do that? I don't know. But that being said, I would prefer Lonzo Ball running a bench unit than Terry Rozier. I think Jaime Jaquez is a guy that's been struggling a lot too this season because he doesn't have the opportunity that he had last season. Of course, Jimmy missed a lot of time, and that's when Jaime Jaquez was really getting opportunity to get his post touches, get the ball at the top of the key and willing to, or had the opportunity to attack a mismatch. And coming off the bench this year, a lot of guys need shots. One of them being Terry Rozier, who shoots a lot of shots. But if you had Jaime Jaquez coming off the bench with Lonzo Ball, well, that's now another guy that could facilitate and get Jaime the ball in areas in which he likes it, which Jaime is a guy that likes to cut. He likes to go back door, hang out at the dunker spot sometimes. I know he's spotting up in the three-point line a lot this year as well. And now maybe you'd have Lonzo Ball to give him some cleaner looks in those corners too. So hopefully Jaime could get his shot back a little bit because it has been very rough. So we talked about the defense of Lonzo, we talked about the facilitating, and then of course, anytime you're talking about putting a guy in this Heat system, you need them to be able to shoot. Because if he's out there with Jimmy, if he's out there with Bam, that's already two guys that don't really space the floor a ton. So you want to have a guy that can sort of complement that. And like we said, Lonzo Ball's three-point numbers were very, very good prior to his injury, and it was on high volume. He really seemed like he took a giant leap in that shooting area. And is that something that can continue? I don't know. That goes for all of these things that I've been saying about Lonzo Ball. Literally, all the characteristics that I've been mentioning about him was all things that he was doing prior to his injury. It was not a minor injury. He missed 2 consecutive seasons. And this season, since he's been back, he's only played 10 games. In those 10 games, he's only averaging 6 points per night. I understand it's on 17 minutes per game, but he's averaging 6 points per night, and the efficiency isn't great. 34% from the field, 32% from 3. So obviously his efficiency isn't that good right now, but the sample size is still small. If Lonzo can't come back soon, stay healthy for a consistent period of time, I do expect him to, of course, get more comfortable, get the rust off, and maybe we get those shooting splits to go up close to what they were at before. He might not have the same athleticism, but he wasn't a player that relied heavily on his athleticism. I know that, of course, helps. Athleticism helps a lot when you're talking about a point of attack defensive guy, but he was a very high IQ player, and that is something that will always be there. And according to the last reports that I just read as of yesterday, he is nearing a return. So his current injury that he's on now, it's just like some knee discomfort. It's not something that I expect him to be out for a long time. He should be back relatively soon, and hopefully he can stay back for quite a while, because I do think he can be a productive player for the rest of the season if that's the case. And of course, a guy that can help the Heat a ton, can really be a huge benefit to this roster for all the reasons that I just mentioned. Now, I want to get into a couple of these trades that I tried cooking up. Now, I want to start off by saying that I reiterate as what I said earlier, it's very difficult to move Terry Rozier. I did do this in my 3-team Vucevic trade that I mentioned earlier as well. That trade looked a little bit something like this. Now, I don't want to do an exact copy of this trade and sort of just insert Lonzo for Vucevic. It doesn't exactly work that way either. Plus, I want to try to do something a little bit different here, but it was a bit difficult because well, I should mention first off, the Bulls would not want to take on Terry Rozier's contract. He gets paid for multiple seasons. Lonzo Ball's an expiring contract. There's no reason that the Bulls would want to take on that extra money unless they were incentivized. Now, the Heat aren't going to attach their only available first-round pick for trade. They're not going to attach that to Terry Rozier just to offload his contract. That would be a nightmare scenario, because you traded a first to get Terry less than a year ago, and if you're attaching a first to get rid of him just less than a year later, that is awful front management of this team. So I don't expect that exactly to happen, which is what makes this difficult, because who the hell would want Terry Rozier? I don't know at this point. I was looking at a team like the Phoenix Suns, who are just willing to spend a lot of money. Maybe they want some more scoring off the bench. We've, of course, heard the Heat's linked to them, mostly regarding Jimmy Butler. But any sort of trade with them would be difficult, because I did cook up something like this, where the Suns send over Jusuf Nurkic to the Chicago Bulls, and they send over a couple of picks to incentivize the Bulls to take Terry Rozier's contract. And in return, the Suns also get Vucevic, who they might look at as an upgrade over Jusuf Nurkic, but because the Suns are over the second apron, they can't aggregate players in a trade. They can only do one player in a trade at a time, which makes this trade impossible, as well as a lot of teams that might be close to the second apron or already over it, because it makes trades difficult. I looked at a team like the Philadelphia 76ers, who are now obviously dealing with a ton of injuries, but specifically Jared McCain, who tore his meniscus. We hope things get better with him soon, but the latest reports indicate that he'll be out 4 to 6 months. And as a team that's really needs to win every game to make a playoff push, because they sit 8-16 at the time of this video, the 76ers might want Terry Rozier. The problem is Terry Rozier makes a lot of money. And on the 76ers, they have a ton of money tied up into Joel Embiid, Paul George, and Tyrese Maxey. Of course, they're not trading any one of those guys. So if they wanted to match the salary for Terry Rozier, they'd have to trade like 4 or 5 players. they'd have to trade maybe Caleb Martin and Kelly Oubre and Andre Drummond and KJ Martin. So there's no way the 76ers could pull off this trade to take Rozier's contract because they're not depleting half their roster to do so. The Orlando Magic is a bit similar in a way that they don't have a lot of tradable contracts to match Terry's salary. If you look at their roster, their most money is tied into Jonathan Isaac, who they're not trading, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, who they just signed this past offseason, so they're not trading. And then all their other young contracts are really young players that I don't think they'd be willing to let go for Terry Rozier. Of course, certainly not Paolo or Franz, but even a guy like Cole Anthony or Anthony Black or Goga Bitadze, who they need now while Paolo and Franz are hurt. I just don't think those are guys that they'd be willing to let go of for Terry Rozier. But I did make a couple trades here that may or may not be likely. Y'all let me know what you think down in the comments below. But in this first one is a 3-team trade involving the Heat, Bulls, and Rockets, in which the Heat received Lonzo Ball from the Chicago Bulls. The Bulls take on Terry Rozier's contract, in addition to the expiring contracts of Steven Adams and Jeff Green. They also get a first-round pick from the Rockets, and in return, the Rockets get the Nikola Vucevic contract. So for the Bulls side of things, they take on a little bit of extra money with Terry Rozier. He only makes about $5 million more per year than Vucevic, and they're on the same length of contract. So it would just be this year or next year. So they're taking on a little bit more money, but they are getting a first-round pick from the Houston Rockets to incentivize them to do so. And then, of course, a couple expirings will come off of their books. Now, for the Houston Rockets, they're essentially trading just the first-round pick to get Vucevic, a guy who is a very productive player this season. Steven Adams, I think they had higher hopes for when they had signed him or traded for him, but he's not really playing too much this season. And of course, Jeff Green is just a veteran presence at this point. Now, the fit with Vucevic is a bit weird because you got Alperen Sengun, who will probably be an all-star this season. By the way, all-star voting open today, so make sure y'all go vote for Tyler Hero. But regardless, I think if the Rockets could add a guy of Vucevic's talent for a first-round pick, you'll find a way to play him. Whether you play him at the 4 next to Sengun in spurts, defensively that sounds terrible, or even if you put Vucevic off the bench as a backup center, I don't know. He's too good to be a backup at this point, but this all goes to me saying I can't find a trade in which the Heat get Lonzo Ball. It's very, very difficult. Plus, to be honest, the Bulls might want even more than this. They would argue, hey, Vucevic is averaging 20 and 10 this season on high-efficiency shooting. We want a first-round pick for that and the first-round pick to take on Terry's contract. So who knows? The only other trade I got is old reliable. The LA Lakers, and the reason that I call them old reliable is because a team that might be willing to play ball is a desperate team. And when you have a 39-year-old LeBron James and you're bordering in the play-in tournament, you really want to secure a playoff seed, you are desperate. You might be willing to do anything. So in this 3-team trade, I have the Heat, Bulls, and Lakers. Of course, the Heat receive Lonzo Ball. The Bulls take on Terry Rozier's contract, in addition to D'Angelo Russell and Christian Wood's expiring contracts. And they get 2 first-round picks from the LA Lakers. And then the Lakers, of course, receive Nikola Vucevic. I do know the Lakers need size. They've been looking for size forever. I do think Vucevic can start next to Anthony Davis. That puts Anthony Davis back at the 4, where he really prefers to play. And the Lakers get a guy who's a very good player, a guy who can space the floor for guys like LeBron and AD. And I, of course, think he'll be a great fit there. They're losing D'Angelo Russell, who they don't seem to be too fondly of. I'm not sure they have plans to retain him this upcoming offseason. So instead of losing him for nothing, they get a guy like Nikola Vucevic in return, who they know they have this year, they know they have next year. And then when you have a really, really aging LeBron, the Lakers can decide to do what they want to do after that. And of course, they'd have a lot of money come off the books then. I know 2 first-round picks for Vucevic might be a lot, but desperate times call for desperate measures, and that's exactly what this situation is currently for the Lakers. And I don't want to hear anything about Christian Wood. He's been very disappointing for the Lakers. He hasn't played a single game this year, and he's on a minimum contract, so he's just a salary filler here. But if you're a Lakers fan watching this and you want to keep Christian Wood, the Lakers do have a few other guys that could be that salary filler there to make the trade work. But anyways, that's really what I got. That's my best possible trade for the Heat to get Lonzo Ball. So in conclusion, I'd love Lonzo Ball in the Heat. If he can get healthy, I think he'd fit great here. If he can't get healthy, I still like his contract a hell of a lot better than Terry Rozier, but it will be a bit difficult to find a trade that works. So let me know y'all thoughts down below on a couple of the trades that I said here. Let me know if you would want Lonzo Ball in the Heat, and let me know if you found your own trade that you cooked up in the trade machine. Let me know it down in the comments below, and maybe I'll make a future video talking about that trade of yours. Other than that, the Miami Heat play the Oklahoma City Thunder tomorrow. Should be a fun game. I'm looking forward to it, and I'll see y'all in the next video. Like, comment, subscribe. Peace out, everyone.
Look, pull up in your city, tryna get that dead face. Do it on my own, I don't need no dead weight. Had to kill him off, yeah, I need a head space. You know this homegrown bitch don't offend me.